In 1519, Spanish conquistador Hernan Cortes encountered a group of Tlaxcalan Indians while on his way to conquer the Aztec Empire in central Mexico. Although initially hostile to Cortes, the Tlaxcalans eventually became close allies with the Spaniards and hosted them in their cities where they regaled the Europeans with stories passed down from their ancestors. As later recalled by expedition member Bernal Diaz del Castillo, the Tlaxcalans told Cortes, quote, that in ancient times there lived here a race of men and women who were of immense stature with heavy bones, and were a very bad and evil-disposed people, whom they had for the greater part exterminated by continual war, and the few that were left gradually died away. And this continued, quote, in order to give us a notion of the huge frame of this people, they dragged forth a bone, or rather a thigh bone, of one of those giants, which was very strong, and measured the length of a man of good stature. The bone was still entire from the knee to the hip joint. I measured it by my own person, and found it to be of my own length, although I am a man of considerable height. They showed us many similar pieces of bone, but they were all worm-eaten and decayed. We, however, did not doubt for an instant that this country was once inhabited by giants. Cortes observed that we ought to forward these bones to His Majesty in Spain by the first opportunity. To the Spanish who were raised, that's the end quote. To the Spanish who were raised in the Catholic Church, the story confirmed biblical tales that claimed that giants once inhabited the earth. According to Christian texts, many of these giants disappeared during Noah's flood, while others survived. This included the Nephilim, who, if you've played the recent Indiana Jones game, they're pretty prominent in it. So this included the Nephilim, who were thought to be the children of angels and human women. Israelites encountered other giants during their exodus from Egypt, and in what is perhaps the most famous story from the Bible, the minuscule David took on the gigantic Goliath. To Cortes, who believed in giants but had never seen evidence of one, the Tlaxcalan's thigh bone was an important relic. That's why he packed it onto a ship with other treasures from the Americas and sent it to the Spanish king, Charles V. So what's the explanation for the story told by the Tlaxcalans? Was there a race of giants in the Americas at some point in the distant past? Had the ancestors of the Tlaxcalans driven them to extinction? So, had the story taken place in Europe, Africa, or Asia, there might be a reasonable explanation for the Tlaxcalan story. Now, historians differ greatly on how to explain the giants of the Bible, as well as giants in Greek, Roman, Norse, and basically every old world civilization's mythology. They all have giants. So some historians credit interpretation errors, okay? So you get these written texts written down, and they think this word means one thing, but it means another thing, or it has two different meanings. So maybe we're getting these stories about giants from the Bible because the word giant is misinterpreted. I've heard giant might translate better to strong, not big. So when they're talking about the Nephilim, maybe they were a people that are just strong or something like that. Other historians say giants were just slightly bigger people, or that a single giant was somebody with gigantism. That's basically a condition where the pituitary gland goes into overdrive and produces way too much growth hormone, okay? So still others contend that giants are like distortions of stories passed down from when Homo sapiens first expanded out of Africa about 75,000 years ago or so. Tons of debate about that date, but just go with me. By that time, people were people. We were walking on two legs. We had language. We wore clothes. We used tools, stone weapons, that type of thing. And because of this stuff, we were incredibly efficient hunters. So the first people to leave Africa discovered that while they were the first humans to leave, they were not the first humanoids to do so. Other bipedal hominins had preceded them. This included the Neanderthals in Europe and the Denisovans in Asia. So humans were were not the first bipedal mammals to leave. There were people before us, okay? So these hominins resembled humans in some ways and could even interbreed with humans, but they were different in other ways. So owing to a lack of fossil evidence, anthropologists disagree on the details about these hominins. In general, they had much larger craniums than humans. They had prominent brows, wider noses, and thicker bones. They were thick with like the 2C thick, okay? Neanderthals were generally shorter than humans, but they had big heads, frames, muscle density, that may have made them appear bigger, okay? We don't have much fossil evidence for Denisovans, but we have like teeth fragments, and they've convinced some anthropologists at least that they were much larger than humans. We have a recently discovered tooth that may say that Denisovans or another hominin species we don't know much about, and there are a bunch of those, or at least a couple of those. But one tooth actually says that there might have been a hominin or like a fragment of the Denisovans that was much, much larger than humans, okay? So while bigger, at least bigger appearing than these other humanoids, the Denisovans, the Neanderthals, they lacked advanced language, cognitive ability, high birth rate, or some other advantage that humans possessed. We don't know exactly what, but because of whatever this was, when these groups competed for resources, humans almost always emerged victorious. They either killed or interbred with those they defeated. By about 25,000 years ago or so, Neanderthals and Denisovans had largely gone extinct as a distinguishable species, although a few fringe scientists and Bigfoot believers think isolated groups could have survived into more recent times. Some historians believe that while Neanderthals and Denisovans went extinct, they survived in oral histories passed down by humans over generations. So they died, but people kept talking about it. Dude, you wouldn't believe this guy, great-grandpa killed, huge, stuff like that. And the stories from the Bible are distorted versions of battles between humans and the last Neanderthals, or, Norse mythology, ice giants, or whatever. Or these could have been encounters with an unknown hominid, maybe an ape-like hominin we don't know about, or a gorilla. But over time, human memory and the telephone game distorted details, and Neanderthals became stuff like the Nephilim, ice giants, stuff like that. So could something similar have happened to explain the Tlaxcalan story? Did Cortes find the leg bone of a Denisovan or some other much larger hominin species? Probably not, okay? So we have not found any evidence of a humanoid species arriving in the New World before humans. Till recently, the Earth was going through the Ice Age, and most of what is today Canada was covered in glaciers that prevented plant growth and therefore animals from inhabiting it. This meant that Denisovans or whatever did not cross into North America because the only way to get there, the Bering Strait, was the only land area that was going across there. Kind of more on that in a second. It was too damn cold, okay? This is one of the problems with Bigfoot theories, which might make sense with the Yeti in the Himalayas because Denisovans, other people existed over there, but there are no humanoid bipedal species in the Americas before humans. At least we know about, and we haven't found any evidence, so it probably wasn't that, okay? So the idea of a separate species or subspecies of human is likely out. What about a particularly tall group of humans that migrated from the old world who simply ceased to exist? So as we all know, humans are essentially the same, but we do have some phenotypical differences, okay? After migrating out of Africa, some people developed lighter skin to better absorb vitamin D. Others in higher elevation evolved greater lung capacity to breathe easier with less oxygen. You also see that in people near shores where they dive down and get stuff. They have bigger lungs. And of course, people develop certain resistances to disease in some areas, and then they have greater resistances in other areas. It's just what happens. You get this large population, you spread it out, you are going to see differences. And of course, some people are taller than others. For a bunch of different hypothesized reasons, we have people of different heights. So the pygmy people of Central Africa, incredibly short, with men averaging less than 5 feet as adults. Very short people. Not far away, at least in global terms, the people of Senegal, there are like pockets of Senegal where you have these people that are just really tall, people that are a foot higher than you would have on average, the pygmy people. You also see the same thing in Europe, the same sort of height differentiation. Mediterranean people, generally shorter than Nordic people, the Viking people, the world's tallest people. In a completely unscientific observation, you kind of see this pretty close. Like I went to Ireland, and me being fairly average, 6 foot, like I'm taller and I'm feeling good. But then I went to Scotland. Everybody's bigger than me, and it scared me. I don't like people taller than me. I like to go to countries where people that are shorter than me. So people differ in heights, okay? So could a really tall subset of people have moved to the Americas at the end of Ice Age when humans finally got in there? Maybe this could have happened. So anthropologists constantly debate how and when humans first came to the Americas, but general consensus is that there were at least more than one wave of humans that started around 20,000 years ago or so. Anthropologists, please don't yell at me. Do better PR if you want better explanation of this. I'm just sort of operating on what I understand, okay? So what we think is the first group came along a coastal route in boats that sailed past the ice sheets covering Canada. So nothing to do in Canada, can't get food there because everything's covered in ice. So you go around on these boats and, fishing and stuff like that. And they populated portions of North and South America before making their way down to Chile over the course of multiple generations, okay? So that's first wave. 13,000 years ago or so, again, a lot of debate, a genetically, technologically, and culturally different group, but they're coming from Siberia. They're also coming from this Bering area where the first group came from. They made their way actually by land through Canada. And so as the Ice Age is coming to an end, which is about 20,000 years ago or so, Canada finally has this sort of corridor in there where everything starts melting, animals starts coming in, and then the second group follows these animals moving in. So eventually these two groups merge together. They both arrive in North America, South America. They're going to fight, trade, interbreed until they're essentially indistinguishable from one another, making today's modern American Indians. There's no indication that either of these groups, by the way, was particularly large or anything like that. Neither of them were giants, okay? So fringe theorists believe that other groups came after these two, all right? So some historians suggest there was a group of Europeans that crossed this northern ice shelf, so imagine Greenland, about the same time as the coastal group was coming down. There's also another sort of fringe group that suggests a Pacific crossing shortly thereafter, either coming from Asia, Siberia, or possibly Australia. Like Northern Europeans, South Asians, Australians might be different enough or taller enough to explain the giants. But there's not much evidence for these other migrations, and those who would propose them would say they happened so long ago it's unlikely the divergent population would survive to recent memory. Okay, so if these migrations had happened like these people propose they did, they would have merged in there, and it would have been too long ago for the Tlaxcalans to be remembering them as their giants, okay? So we might have also had some weird migrations at a later date. We'll talk more about possible pre-Columbian contact a little bit later, or at a later date. But you might have had Africans coming over. You might have had Polynesians coming over, maybe a particularly big group or something like that. Again, there's no DNA evidence from that. There are isolated pockets of people. There's a recent study that came out from Colombia that shows a DNA group that's unrelated to other American Indians that existed before Columbus. I don't know enough about that to say where they came from. It is possible that there are other groups that just showed up that could explain this giant hypothesis. So humans that somehow showed up in the Americas somehow, and were sort of a different branch of humans. However, I don't think that's the case for these giants, okay? Most likely origin of the giants, or at least the tale I'm going to see, is that there were pockets of American Indians whose ancestors migrated in the original wave, so the 20,000-year wave, the 13,000-year or so wave, but they evolved once they reached into the Americas to be particularly tall before the Tlaxcalans fought them. So when humans first migrated out of Africa, we see genetic differentiation. You're going to see the same thing in Americas as humans populate North America and South America, okay? So if you have few generations of people, let's say, preferring tall people, and there's no evolutionary negatives to tallness, they're going to have tall kids. And after a couple generations, they're going to be different from the surrounding population. So, for an example, Caitlin Clark, LeBron James, they have a kid, and they probably should. That kid would be so good. But at basketball, but they'd be tall. You're just going to have tall people, all right? So, again, and if you have their kids have kids, they're going to be a lot taller and better in basketball than the rest of us, okay? So the Spanish noticed these differentiations a lot, all right? So in these first contact documents, and I mean tons of these things, the Spanish loved to point out the height and physical differences between people. So they would meet this group of people in this Indian town, this group of people in this Indian town, and they would say this group is tall and good looking, this group is short and miserable. And, the difference from these groups would be one group to the next. It might be like 5 miles away, like, oh, these group of people are awesome, these group of people are not. So dietary habits probably explain some of this, but there's going to be genetic differences that explain some of it as well, okay? And some of these descriptions have some of these American Indians being very, very, very tall, okay? And we actually see some Europeans label some of these American Indians as giants, okay? So, for example, in 1522, Ferdinand Magellan, famous for, he didn't make it around the world, but his crew did, but on his expedition around the world, he's going to stop before going through the Straits of Magellan, which is at the southern part of South America. But while he's at sort of the southeastern part of South America, I believe it's right there, southeastern Argentina, would today be Argentina, he stops. I think they're getting fur or something like that, or food or whatever. But they see these people and they're like, oh crap, these people are giants. We've actually found the giants from Bible. So they see these live people. They're going to bring one over. I believe they just trick one in on the ship. They capture them, stick them in the ship. And Magellan's going to write in his documents, and at least his co-pilot's going to write in his documents, that this is the area where there's tall people. They call this the land of the big feet people, we think, which is roughly the name Patagonia. Patagonia, roughly foot. Gonia, roughly giant. So if you're wearing Patagonia clothes, it's the land of the tall people, okay? So the Spanish did think there were giants here. But what we know today is that the people of Patagonia are a large subset of American Indians who were tall, but they're not that tall. We today would not call them giants. So what we've done is we dug up the bones. I mean, you still have some of these people around today, their descendants around today. And what we figured out is the men are averaging about 6 feet in height. Now, not giant to us today, but to Magellan and his crew, nutrition, maybe other stuff in there, meant that the Spanish of the time, the Spanish and Portuguese, are going to be closer to 5 feet tall. So when they meet these Patagonians, they're 6 feet tall. That's pretty tall. And maybe they just met a particular group where they had some people even taller than that. So the guy they brought on the boat, they mentioned him like hitting his head on the boat and like barely being able to fit there. Well, we've looked back, and I think the boat was like 6'4" or something like that. So the guy was probably 6'7" or something, which is very tall, but it's not a giant, okay? All right, so particularly maybe, so we got that in Patagonia, maybe there was one of these tall people in central Mexico that the Tlaxcalans encountered a couple hundred years or whatever before the Spaniards. That could be these evil people that the Tlaxcalans are describing that they beat to Hernan Cortes. Now, that's, I think, a reasonable explanation, but it doesn't explain the large femur bone, okay? Patagonians or whatever this group in central Mexico might have been tall, but they certainly don't possess femurs that, quote, measured the length of a man of good stature. So the Spanish, Bernal Diaz del Castillo, let's say he's 5'4", 5'5", or whatever. That's a big ass bone if you're talking about it, okay? It does not explain the larger than average femur bone. Nor would a group affected by gigantism. So let's say that the Tlaxcalans, they have this giant bone, and they're picking the longest one, and it's a group from particularly tall people, and it's the tallest guy has got gigantism, pituitary glands going out of control. This thing might be big, but it's not going to be as big as a man. So again, Bernal Diaz del Castillo says, quote, I measured it by my own person and found it to be of my own height, or my own length, although I'm a man of considerable height. Even the tallest record or recorded person ever, a guy named Robert Wadlow, if you ever go to, what's the name? Ripley's Believe It or Not, you'll have size comparisons with him. But he's '8'11", and his thighs really long, nowhere near the height of a man, though. Like, you'll stand beside it, so even somebody 5'4", 5'5", or whatever, you're going to come up to his waist, which is going to be his ankles and his thighs. Not this thigh bone's certainly not going to be bigger. So there's got to be a different explanation for the bone, all right? Well, historian Adrienne Mayor believes the giant was not a human at all. Instead, she thinks the Tlaxcalans were remembering long ago battles with megafauna, and in particular, battles with land sloths, okay? So just as humans had done with Denisovans, Neanderthals they encountered when they left Africa, they're going to drive a lot of large species of mammals to extinction, okay? So they're fighting Neanderthals and Denisovans because they're competing with them for food, but they're going to be killing off these large mammals because they're good to eat, okay? And also they're slow. A woolly mammoth doesn't move very fast. If you've got stone spears, you run up, start sticking it, the guy dies, okay? So the hunting of the megafauna extinction is going to be particularly brutal in the Americas, where animals had not had the benefit of encounters with Neanderthals or Denisovans to learn to be scared of bipedal creatures. So Neanderthals, they even had rudimentary stone and wood weapons. So they're going up there using their, not as smart as humans language, and some debate about that, but and they're inefficiently killing these animals. Humans come up and they start killing them, but at least the animals had the benefit of the less smart Neanderthals to sort of train them. The Americas, because they didn't have humanoids before humans come in, they're way advanced, and they're just going to start killing these guys off quickly. So by the end of the Ice Age, humans have killed off New World versions of camels, giant elks, giant armadillos, woolly mammoths, and even the large prey that relied on these animals that humans kind of stayed away from, like the dire wolves, maybe bringing that guy back, and saber-toothed tigers. They went extinct because the stuff that they ate, that stuff is gone. All right, so one target of the first humans to enter the Americas was a ground sloth, which these things can be the size of a rhinoceros, okay? So we know modern sloths, they dwell in trees, they move incredibly slow. Sloth is a name for being slow. These ground sloths could be incredibly vicious, and they move a lot faster than modern sloths. They also have sharp claws that could kill rivals and predators, and they're dense enough and they're powerful enough to actually carve caves into dense rock. So if you go to Brazil, there's these caves, people couldn't understand how they're formed. One person hypothesized it as ground sloths digging into essentially solid stone and creating these caves. So if somebody attacks them, these first humans, they're going to be in a world of hurt. And we actually have tracks in New Mexico that show humans hunting a ground sloth, and the ground sloth, the tracks turn around and they're swiping at the humans, we think. Again, it's just tracks. But it reared up and attacked them. So this ferociousness and the fact that many ground sloths lived in remote, inhospitable areas meant that they're going to be one of the last megafauna to be driven to extinction by humans in the Americas. So some think they're going to survive until about 5,000 years ago. I think that's sort of the closer date. A handful of people, and this is cryptozoologists and stuff, think they're still in the Brazilian Amazon today. Probably not, but I don't think it'd be unreasonable to believe that a couple survived until a couple thousand years ago, okay? So perhaps this Tlaxcalan bones was one of these last pockets of land sloths hiding out in the jungles of central Mexico. Maybe they went extinct a few hundred years before the arrival of the Spanish. And what the Tlaxcalan's ancestors are talking about is their fight with these guys, these giant creatures. Somehow that gets distorted into thinking they're humans. Very reasonable explanation. And if you're listening to professional historians that have studied this, that's the one you should probably accept. I don't know if it's exactly that. I think there may be something to that, but I'm going to give you an explanation that I think is it's a personal opinion that kind of combines a couple of these different theories. Okay, so the reason I don't necessarily buy the large land sloth thing is that I don't think that it has the bone length to be the thigh bone. They can get long, but I don't think they can get long as a man. Maybe somebody knows a really big land sloth. I don't know, but it's not going to be as long as 5'5" Castillo. So here's my explanation. Take it with a grain of salt. I believe that the Tlaxcalan ancestors fought a particularly large group of American Indians. Okay, again, not anything crazy. They're humans. They're not humanoids. They're humans. They moved to an area. Maybe started getting tall. LeBron James and Caitlin Clark start doing it. And they have this particular subset of group. They're, say, 6'2" on average or something. Big for the region, but not really giants, okay? They defeat these guys in battle a couple hundred years, maybe 1,000 years before the Spaniards arrive. And then they tell this story to their kids like, dude, before you were born, we were fighting these big-ass people. They were giants. They were whatever. They passed it down to their children's children, and you get this exaggeration. And by the time the Spaniards arrive, they're saying, oh, these giants were everywhere. So you have this long story, okay? So I think the thigh bone was discovered generations after the defeat of these large Indians. And what the Tlaxcalans who found the bone did would have inserted into their mythology. So great-great-great-grandpa defeated these giants. Look at this fossil that I found. It must be one of these giants. Now, what bone was it? It could have come from a land sloth, like the explanation is. I believe it's more likely the bone of a mastodon or a mammoth. These really big animals that definitely have these long thigh bones. So you have this later generation of Tlaxcalans. They find a mammoth bone, let's say a whole collection of mammoth. So mammoths went extinct and mastodons went extinct in the Americas. Humans drove them to extinction. They actually, from what we understand, drove them to extinction before land sloths. So that probably wouldn't have been the giant. I also don't think a mammoth would have been the origin of the stories about the giants because it didn't really look like humans. Land sloths, you can kind of squint and see that, possibly, but I don't think that would be mistaken for humans. But their bones could be. So imagine you find a cache of bones. They're all separated. People a long time ago had feasted on them, ate them, so thigh bone here, skull bones here. And these Tlaxcalans find them, and they see these bones, and they're going to look at the skull bone of the mastodon. So if you look at a mastodon mammoth skull, they look kind of human. They really do. It looks like a giant one-eyed human skull. In fact, it looks so much like a skull that a lot of Greek historians think the origin of the Cyclops. So the guy, what was he in the, where was he? Oh, that was a Minotaur. But this huge creature, giant, strong, powerful, or whatever. Some people thought the Cyclops is a mistaken elephant skull. Elephant skulls look exactly like close to mammoth mastodon skulls. So we think that I think at least these Tlaxcalans found this skull, thought it might be a giant human. So you have the story of great-great-great-great-grandpa defeating these large people. And then a couple generations later, you see this skull, and you're like, holy crap, this must have been who great-great-great-great-great-grandpa was talking about. You gather the bones up, Cortes shows up, and you're like, dude, look at this crap that great-grandpa killed. Can you believe this stuff, okay? So this kind of misidentification of fossils is very common. Some people think that the origin of dragons is from people finding whale bones. You see a whale bone, especially in an area that's dry where there's no water. People a lot of times can't understand that water used to be places, but it wasn't. So how'd this thing get here? Well, it can't be a whale. It can't be a fish because there's no water here. So that must have been flown here. It's a dragon, stuff like that. Or most of this stuff could all just BS. Like maybe the Tlaxcalans, their ancestors, never fought a giants at all. Maybe they fought normal people. Maybe they just fought like small people. Who knows? Maybe they just made stuff up, or people were telling stories. It gets passed down. People start mistaking it for fact. The Tlaxcalans also could have been effing with Cortes. I mean, we don't know. We don't know for sure. We do know that there was that bone. Cortes wrote about it. Castillo wrote about it, and they actually do send it back to the King of Spain. So one way we could know for sure what's going on here is if we test that bone. We genetically test it, and we can see if it's a mammoth, if it's a mastodon, if it's a human, if it's some humanoid, So Cortez does send this back. He puts it on a ship, but it never reaches Spain. So what happens is the French at that point, they're hearing about these treasures that are coming back from Spanish America. French and Spain are always fighting. A group of French privateers intercepts the ship that's carrying the bone, steals it, steals all its treasure. I don't think we know what happens to that ship. Maybe it gets brought back to the French king. Maybe the bone is stuck in a French archive somewhere. It's also possible the pirates get it, and they're like, oh, here's gold, here's silver. Oh, it's just a useless big-ass bone. Who cares about this? Toss it over the side. But if we do find that in an archive, then we can eventually know what the Tlaxcalan Giant actually was.